Sound 1, 2, check. Let's get this started. Alright, so it's October 4th, 1895, during the gay 90s. That's literally the name of the time period. You can go look it up. Joe Frank Keaton was born by parents Joe and Myra Keaton. And Joe and Myra Keaton ran a vaudeville act. And if you don't know what a vaudeville act is, it's pretty much just a traveling show where they did variety acts on stage. And it's pretty much just the circus, but a little more civilized. His parents ran a vaudeville act called the Mohawk Indian Medicine Company. And the show got so popular that years after it started, they started selling drugs that were federally regulated by the FDA. Literally, it was around back then. It was made by Teddy Roosevelt, my big man, my big juicy sweet boy. Just want to act like I'm sexually attracted to Teddy Roosevelt.
Who isn't?
He's an attractive man. And to give you a modern equivalent for this, it's absolutely insane. It's as if you went in to go watch the new Lego movie at IMAX, and then you're walking out, and you got your bucket of popcorn right next to your Ozempic. It's insane. Now to back up a little bit, back when he was about 18 months old, Buster fell down the stairs, and when he landed at the bottom of them with no injuries at all, his dad's friend George said, "Gee whiz, he's a real Buster." And that's apparently where he got his nickname from, and his dad liked it so much that he just kept using it. Now, for some reason, this is just a very controversial story for him, because I keep looking around on the internet, and there's stories where he's 3 years old, there's stories where he's 6 months old, there's stories where he's weeks old, and all of them, they all involve Harry Houdini giving him his name. So that means Harry Houdini was just hanging out with this random vaudeville guy and was just like, "Oh damn, your baby fell down the stairs, that's crazy." And that's, apparently how he got his name. I like to believe it was George, because that's a way more boring story, and the boring stories are usually the more true ones when it comes to stupid stuff like that. Now one day, Buster woke up, he was 3 years old, and he heard his mom yelling at him from downstairs.
"Buster, you're too old now to be playing with those damn fidget spinners. Get your ass down here and help me with this laundry."
After hearing this, Buster reluctantly came downstairs and started helping his mom with the laundry when he got his index finger caught in a clothes wringer, and it was crushed. His parents sent him to the ER when they had to amputate his finger down to the right knuckle. Well, the first knuckle. A few years later, his father Joe changed the name of the act to the Three Keatons. And the reason he did that was because it changed more from a stage act to more of an acrobatics act. And it was billed as the roughest act that was ever in the history of the stage, starring the little boy who can't be damaged, which, if you ask me, that's just a pending CPS case waiting to happen. And Buster acted in this show. His official debut was October 17th in 1900. The dude was only 5 years old, which is just absolutely baller. Now during this act, Buster would start trolling his dad little by little, doing little things, kicking him in the shins, calling him stupid names, whatever he did. I don't really know what he did. But his dad would get so mad to the point where he would just pick up Buster and throw him in this, stage scenery, and sometimes he would even throw him into the orchestra pit. And at some point during this whole extravaganza, I guess it became sort of a routine for him to annoy his dad and for his dad to just throw him around the stage. And because it became such a routine, his dad would literally sew suitcase handles into some of Buster's clothes so that when he would annoy him, he could just grab onto the handle and just chuck him.
1, 2, 3!
My name is Joe Keaton. Not him. Me.
And because of all this absolutely rambunctious ridiculousness, Buster would learn at a very young age how to make fake falls look good, and his dad rarely ever heard him from any of these antics. And while Buster was a young man, he gave an interview to the Detroit News, where he said, and I quote, "The secret is in landing lip and breaking a fall with a foot or a hand. It's a knack. I started so young that landing right is second nature to me. Several times I've been killed if I hadn't been able to land like a cat. Imitators of ours don't last long because they can't stand the treatment." So sometimes during the act, Buster would sometimes laugh while his dad would throw him across the stage, and he realized that while he was laughing, the audience would actually laugh less than when he wouldn't laugh, which I don't really understand, because I don't understand how throwing a laughing child isn't as funny as throwing a non-laughing child, but I guess I don't throw children into orchestra pits every day, so I don't know, it's not my job. And these are the origins of where Buster would adopt his legendary name as the Great Stone Face. And now these Jive Turkey Jayhawkers act was so rough at times that some audience members would actually believe that it was real, and his dad was just going insane on stage and was just like, ah, ah, and just throwing his son around. And this would literally lead to some of the audience members calling the police and reporting child abuse on the Keatons, and sometimes to the point where the Keatons would literally be arrested. But every time, Buster was able to show the cops that he had no broken bones or any bruises at all, which, even when I was his age, I had a lot of bruises, so that's crazy. Now, this whole time while Keaton was performing, he was made to attend school, but the only report I can see is that he attended part of one day, which I don't know if that means part of one day a week, or he literally went to one day of school. Well, either way, he kept working in vaudeville up until literally the point where the government said nope and put child labor laws in to prevent children in vaudeville, so he literally did it until the last day he was allowed. And by the time Buster turned 21, his dad Joe had turned into a raging alchemist, which had pushed his family away so much that his mother and him would move to New York City. The year's 1917, and Buster is performing a Broadway play in New York City to help support his mom. And there is where he ran into an old friend in the streets of New York from vaudeville that introduced him to a man called Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, who invited Buster to be in his up-and-coming movie, The Butcher Boy. After his first day on set, Buster asked Fatty if he could take home one of the film cameras so he could tinker with it in his hotel room. And Fatty said, yeah, sure, go ahead, take the $1,000 camera, I got a closet full of them, go right ahead. And this whole interaction is what pretty much launched Buster's film career and his lifelong friendship that he would have with Fatty Arbuckle. Now, if you know anything about 1917, a couple years later, a really famous archduke got assassinated outside of a subway, so that started World War I. And around this time where he started his friendship with Fatty Arbuckle, Buster actually got drafted into World War I. But because it was 1917, it had already started to die down, and by the time Buster was even sent into theater in Germany and France, and most of his job over there was just entertaining other soldiers that were coming home from theater. And the only thing of real significance that happened to Buster during the war while he was just entertaining other soldiers was he got an inner ear infection that would leave him with permanent hearing damage for the rest of his life. And a couple of years after Buster got home from war, in 1920, he would star in his first feature-length film, The Saphead. And this is when Fatty Arbuckle would give Buster his own film studio to start producing his own short films. And according to myth, Buster loved baseball so much that if you were filling out one of his resumes, the number one question would be, are you a good actor? And the number two question would be, are you good at baseball? And a yes to either of those questions would get you a job at a studio. So now that Fatty and Buster both got their own studios and they're both making their own short films and life is good, just like East Side versus West Side, one of them's got to go down for some stupid reasons. And I say that because Fatty Arbuckle, just the next year, was literally tried 3 times for the murder of his girlfriend, Virginia Rapp. And you didn't hear me incorrectly. He was tried for the same murder 3 times. I guess they didn't have Double Jeopardy back then. They didn't have Bob Barker, whoever the fuck was on that show. So, I don't know, I'm not old. And although being found not guilty every time he was tried, this absolutely destroyed his reputation. And he wasn't able to make any short films or star in really any movies ever again after that point. So if you think being canceled was just a thing of right now in this generation, people have been being canceled forever. And throughout all 3 of these court cases, Buster would stay by Fatty Arbuckle's side and give him directorial work, support him financially, and at the risk of his own reputation and career, he would even offer to testify on behalf of Fatty Arbuckle. And Leo McCarthy, a comedy director of the time who worked with Buster, said, all of us tried to steal each other's gagmen, but we had no luck with Keaton because he thought up his best gags himself, and we couldn't steal him. At around this time, he married his first wife, Natalie Talmadge, and they had 2 sons. In 1924, Buster was starring in a feature film, Sherlock Jr., when he was asked to perform a stunt where he was running on top of a running train, and he was supposed to grab the spout of a water tower, and as the train was leaving and the last car goes off screen, he grabs onto the spout and hangs off it, and the weight from his body pulls the spout down and launches gallons and gallons of water on top of him. And I guess the filmmakers didn't think it would be that strong, but the force of the water was so great that it literally shot him down to the ground and fractured his neck, which Buster didn't even care. He just ignored the pain until a callus grew over the fracture, and he didn't even know he broke his neck until a decade later when a doctor x-rayed him and just looked at his neck and was just like, hey, yo, buddy, were you in a car crash this morning? What's happening?
Jesus, Phil, you were in the hospital last night.
I guess so, yeah.
You okay?
Yeah, Alan, I'm fine.
And soon after, Buster started another film called The General. It It was set during the Civil War, and in it was a locomotive chase scene where the locomotive literally drove towards and drove off of a burning bridge. And this one shot in this one film was the most expensive shot in silent film history. It cost, I don't even know how much. Must have been a lot though. And after this film was released, Keaton was never given full control of any of his movies ever again. And these were the first signs of him losing creative control ever. And now it's the year 1928 and Buster's filming the movie Steamboat Bill. And now this movie is arguably where he has his most famous stunt, where a rogue wind blows through his whole town and it just starts blowing buildings down. Buster's sick and it blows down the hospital he's in. It starts pulling the bed away from where he was sleeping in the hospital. And then it pulls him in front of another building where the front of the building is getting torn off by the wind. And just as Buster stands up out of bed, the whole building falls on top of Buster. And the only reason that he's saved is because he was standing exactly where a small window was at the top. Which, I know you've seen this
Gosh darn
clip. I know I didn't have to explain that to you, because I know you've seen it. We've all seen this. And even if you haven't seen Buster Keaton's version, I know you've seen Jackass 2. And obviously, that's where Johnny Knoxville was inspired for the ending of Jackass 2, if you've ever seen that. Where, literally, you can see here side by side, it's almost exactly the same thing, except Johnny Knoxville just dies. And a little while after he made Steamboat Bill, his contract was sold to MGM, which Buster said was the worst professional mistake that was ever made in his career. So, makes sense to me, because usually whenever you give MGM money, it doesn't go anywhere other than in their own pocket, so makes sense. And trouble started brewing even in Keaton's first film with MGM, which was The Cameraman, which, you know, critics actually regard to be a pretty good film. But despite that, Keaton had immense troubles with the script. He's even quoted as saying, "It was as long as War and Peace," which is a book that's 1,400 pages long. And also, I took out 40 useless characters and a couple of subplots. These guys didn't realize, they still don't realize, that the best comedies are simple. I say, "I'd like to do something with a drunk and a fat lady and a kid. Get 'em for me." And at my studio, we would have the characters I wanted in 10 minutes. But not MGM. You had a requisition toothpick and triplicate. I just stood there and everyone was hassling. The year after, Buster filmed the movie Spite Marriage, which was his last silent film before he completely transitioned over to sound. And it was his first movie that he used a stuntman in. He brought it up to MGM and he wanted it to be a talkie, and if you don't know, that means it had sound. And MGM came back to him and they said they didn't have enough talkie theaters back then, and on top of that, it would just be too expensive for the time. And even despite this little hiccup with MGM, he was one of the only actors back then to actually embrace talkies. He is quoted saying, "When someone goes boom, they really go boom." And even to prove his point, Keaton would star in a film that same year called The Hollywood Revenue of 1929, which I don't understand why they would call it that at all. It doesn't make any sense. What?
It's not called that.
What is it called?
It's called the Hollywood Review.
It's not called that! And just to prove his point, that same year in 1929, he would star in a movie called The Hollywood Review of 1929, which I don't know why you would call a movie that. It makes absolutely no sense, and the name sucks. By 1932, his marriage with Natalie Talmadge was over, and they got a divorce. And he didn't fight her at all. To make her happy, he gave her his house, most of his assets, and even cut contact with his two boys. And just to spite him, she changed her name back to Talmadge and forbid the two boys from ever seeing their father. And years later, when they were grown, they rekindled a relationship with their father, but still, she's kind of a
female dog.
Like, if you've ever seen Godfather 2, like, it's not that bad, but, you know.
Because this must all end! I know now that it's over. I knew it then.
And by the early 30s, his personal and professional hardships had taken the better of him, and they had made him bend the elbow a little too much, and it would make him a little bit more violent and erratic than usual. And by 1930, he's got no bitches, no money, and he's a full-blown alchemist, so MGM fired him from the position they had him in. And after that, he spent some time in hospitals and in rehabs, pretty much trying to get sober, and that's where he met his second wife, May Scrivens. I don't know, put the name right here. I don't know how the you say this. and they got hastily married that same year and divorced 2 years later. So, in 1940, he met and married his third wife, Eleanor Norris. So, I guess third time's the charm, but I don't understand why this guy just keeps marrying women the same year he meets them. I mean, I guess it worked the third time, but I don't know, man. Not a good strategy. And during that entire decade of the 1940s, he was spending his time pretty much just working as an underpaid gagman, which gagman was pretty much what they called comedians back then. Way cooler name. I don't know why we got rid of it, but he was pretty much underpaid and uncredited for all the work that he did as a gagman in this whole decade. And even during this time, he worked under the Marx Brothers. So if you don't know who they are, I don't know, you can look them up. You got Google. And in 1949, he was consulted for a film called In the Good Old Summertime, where he was asked to do a scene where a man would destroy an expensive violin. And finding no one else better to fit the role, Buster would take it. And this one role he did completely revitalized interest in his older movies, which gave him world tours, TV interviews, TV roles, and film roles to do for the rest of his life. And during this time, after that feature role, that really gave him a jump start back into stardom. He appeared in many commercials like Colgate, Alka-Seltzer, Budweiser, Ford, Milky Way, you name it. They even got 7-Up and Marlboro. A few years later, a British actor named James Mason bought Buster's Hollywood mansion, where he would find some of Buster's lost movies where he would take it upon himself to preserve them. And if you're more of a scriptured folk like I am, you can go find a book on Amazon right here that he has called My Wonderful World of Slapstick. If you like this video so much, if you want to read a book about it, there you go. I don't write books. And in 1966, Buster was diagnosed with lung cancer, and here is where his doctors thought it would be more debilitating to his health to actually tell him that he had lung cancer, so his doctors just told him that he was recovering from a severe case of bronchitis. And despite his failing health, he was active in walking around until the day he died. And by account of his own wife, he was even playing cards with his friends the day before he died. So, this guy was probably eating bowls of cereal and nails for breakfast.
Without any milk.
And after his passing, Dick Van Dyke would give the eulogy at his funeral, which... And he made his last film appearance 7 months after he died, in a film named A Funny Thing Happened on a Way to the Forum. I don't know what's up with these crazy names from back then. I don't know. I'm glad we figured it out nowadays, but nowadays we didn't even figure it out, because now we got Matrix Revolution, Reloaded, Reheated. I don't know what they're going to come out with next. But, you know, back then they had really long titles. Now we have really long sequels. It's just a different type of stupid. He made over 150 films in his entire career, and he was the first stuntman. Like, literally, you can go look it up. It says he was the first guy to be a stuntman for another actor. And he often surrounded himself with bigger men on set to make himself look like he was at a disadvantage, which is often what Charlie Chaplin did. And I don't know if one got the idea from the other, but nothing's new under the sun. And if you've ever seen I Love Lucy, the main reason you probably like that show is because Buster Keaton was a mentor to Lucille Ball when she was younger. He died the same day as Hedda Hopper, who he co-starred with in Sunset Boulevard, which is insane. He has 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, 1 for TV and 1 for movies. And Entertainment Weekly named Buster as the 7th greatest director of all time and the 35th greatest actor of all time. He appeared in 4 of the American Film Institute's 100 Funniest Movies, and he appeared in 8 movies that are literally in the Library of Congress today. And out of 8 of them, he directed 7. And out of all the reasons that I recorded this video, while I was researching this, I found one quote. Well, really, my mom found it. And when she read the quote out to me, I knew we had to do this video because this thing pretty much sums up the entirety of everything I just said. The quote says, "I think I have had the happiest and luckiest of lives. Maybe this is because I've never expected as much as I got, and when the knocks came, I felt it was no surprise. I had always known that life was like that, full of uppercuts for the undeserving and deserving alike." I don't know, this guy's just a complete badass. And out of all the people I learned about in history class in school, none of them come close to how cool this guy is, because he's literally just a cold-blooded American. I mean, his work ethic is unmatched. The dude was working on stage and filming it since he was 5 years old. The guy literally worked and was filming and on stage entertaining other people for 66 years of his life. And the dude died at 70. If you do the math on that, the guy probably spent more time on stage entertaining people than he did sleeping. It's insane. And if I had to bring Kyle on screen from South Park right now to make everyone shut up and have a really stupid speech about explaining the moral of the story to you guys, the moral of the story I would say is pretty much just be a good friend, watch out for really stupid big corporations, and don't drink potions that you shouldn't drink. You can drink potions, but if you get a six-pack of potions, only drink like 1 or 2 of them. You know, put the rest in the fridge. You don't need all of them that night. I mean, even Mel Brooks agrees with me about how cool this guy is. I mean, he's even quoted as saying, I owe Buster a lot on 2 levels. One for being such a great teacher for me as a filmmaker myself, and the other is just being a human being. Watching this gifted person doing these amazing things. He made me believe in make-believe. God, I love Mel Brooks. I want to suck his little... Because he thought he
Duck.
Why can't you say it right? I don't know. Why can't you say it right? I don't know. Stop yelling at me. Okay, I'm sorry.